What would you do if the love of your life betrayed you while you were carrying his child? How do you rebuild your life when trust is shattered, and every step forward feels like a step into the unknown? This is the story of Sarah, a young woman who navigates the devastating betrayal of her partner, the struggle of single motherhood, and a dangerous, forbidden bond with her son that could change everything. At just 20 years old, Sarah thought she had everything figured out. A promising future, a job as a nursing assistant at the local hospital, and a loving partner in Frankie. He was everything she had ever wanted: tall, confident, with a mischievous smile that made her heart skip a beat. When they first met, Sarah believed it was fate. They were young, yes, but love felt effortless, natural. Sarah never expected life to change so suddenly. When she found out she was pregnant, a whirlwind of emotions swept over her: panic, fear, excitement, but most of all, hope. She imagined this child would tie her and Frankie even closer, solidifying the dream they had for their future. Frankie had always talked about how great it would be to start a family, how much he looked forward to having kids someday. So when Sarah told him the news, she expected joy, maybe even a little celebration. But instead, she was met with indifference, then excuses. He promised to support her, to be there, but those promises began to feel hollow. As Sarah's belly grew, so did her doubts. Frankie's attention shifted. He started coming home later, staying out with his friends more often, giving Sarah only fleeting moments of his time. It was as though the idea of fatherhood was something distant, something to avoid. Sarah watched the man she loved drift away, and the helplessness settled in. She tried to convince herself that everything would be okay, that love could fix this. But deep down, she knew she was holding on to a lie. It wasn't until the night she found the text messages from another woman, that Sarah realized how far Frankie had fallen. His betrayal wasn't just a fleeting mistake, it was something deeper, something that shattered the foundation of the life they had built. And in that moment, Sarah knew that things could never go back to the way they were. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that had led up to it. The broken promises, the empty gestures, the abandonment. She couldn't fix him. She couldn't fix them. The hardest part wasn't ending the relationship. It was knowing that the person she loved was capable of betrayal at such a deep level. Sarah made the gut-wrenching decision to leave Frankie behind, to move forward for the sake of their unborn child, Phoenix. It was a painful goodbye, but Sarah was determined that her son's future wouldn't be tainted by someone who couldn't see the value of family. It wasn't just the affair. It was the indifference, the growing distance between them that stung the most. Sarah had always believed that love could fix things, that it could heal wounds, but Frankie's actions told a different story. Each time she tried to confront him, to talk about what was happening, he would dismiss her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he'd say. "I'm still here. I still care," but his words rang hollow. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, she tried her best to focus on the excitement of the baby, the new life she was creating. She imagined their little family, how they would decorate the nursery together, how Frankie would be by her side for the birth. She tried to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, the arrival of their child would bring Frankie back. But then the phone rang. It wasn't just a missed call from a friend or a work-related issue, it was a text message from an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of her, and Sarah opened the message. Her heart stopped when she saw the photos: a woman, smiling into Frankie's eyes, a clear intimacy between them. The lies, the denial, it all fell apart in an instant. She didn't need to read more. She didn't need to see any more proof. The betrayal was right there in front of her. For a long time, Sarah just stared at the phone in disbelief. The realization that Frankie had been unfaithful during her pregnancy hit her like a freight train. She had been so naive, so desperate to believe that love could fix everything. But now, in this cold moment, she saw the truth. Frankie didn't care. He had never cared the way she needed him to. When she confronted him, there were no apologies, no remorse. He didn't even try to explain himself, he just gave her more excuses, more lies, and a weak promise to do better, but Sarah was no longer listening. She had been listening to his lies for months, waiting for him to prove himself. Now, she was done. The decision to end their relationship was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. But deep down, she knew it was the only way forward. She couldn't stay in a relationship built on lies, especially when she was about to bring a child into the world. It was over. And as she packed her things and walked away, Sarah made a vow no matter what happened, Phoenix would never have to grow up in a home like the one she had just left. Life as a single mother wasn't something Sarah had planned for. She had always imagined a traditional family, a partner by her side as they both navigated the challenges of parenthood together. But now, as she held her newborn son, Phoenix, in her arms, the reality of motherhood was settling in. Phoenix was a beautiful baby, the perfect mix of her and Frankie's features. Every time she looked into his innocent eyes, Sarah's heart swelled with love. But the loneliness of raising him alone soon became overwhelming. There were no late-night talks with Frankie, no shared excitement over baby milestones. It was just Sarah, doing her best to balance her demanding job as a nursing assistant with the constant needs of her son. Phoenix's cries in the middle of the night felt louder when Sarah had no one to share the responsibility with. She found herself exhausted, emotionally drained, wondering how she would make it through the day. The weight of the world seemed to fall squarely on her shoulders, and even though she loved her son more than anything, there were moments when the isolation felt suffocating. Yet, despite everything, Phoenix was the reason Sarah kept going. His tiny hands gripping her finger, his warm body cuddled close to hers at night, it was the one thing that made everything else fade away. In him, Sarah found her strength. There was no choice but to keep moving forward for him. Every day was a challenge, and Sarah had to remind herself that it would get better. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, it was all for Phoenix. But even as she found purpose in motherhood, a part of her longed for something more. A partner. Someone who could help carry the burden, someone who would love her, who could give her the stability she craved. But the more she thought about dating again, the more she hesitated. How could she trust another person? How could she ever open her heart again, knowing the pain that betrayal had caused her? So Sarah focused on Phoenix. She built their life around him, giving him everything she had. But deep inside, she knew that her own needs, her own desires were being left behind, buried in the rubble of her past heartbreak. It was a cold afternoon when Sarah first met Grant. She had taken Phoenix to the park for a walk, needing a break from the long hours at work and the constant juggling of motherhood. Grant was there, sitting on a bench with a cup of coffee, looking out at the playground with a quiet smile. He noticed Sarah almost immediately. There was something about her tired eyes, the way she lovingly watched over her son that caught his attention. Grant wasn't like the other men Sarah had known. He was older, more composed, and had a way about him that exuded calmness. When he approached her, offering to help with Phoenix's stroller, Sarah felt a spark of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't seem like someone who would judge her for being a single mother. In fact, he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. They talked for hours that day, the conversation flowing easily as if they had known each other for years. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. Grant was supportive, attentive, and seemed to appreciate Sarah's strength and resilience. He didn't push her, he understood the challenges she faced as a single mother. He made her feel seen, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since her breakup with Frankie, Sarah felt the flicker of something more than just loneliness. She felt hope. Grant didn't have any children of his own, but he was kind to Phoenix, always asking about his interests, offering to take them out on weekends. Sarah felt a sense of relief in his presence, the way he made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for happiness again. He was everything she had been looking for: patient, stable, and emotionally available. With him, she could imagine a future, one that was different from the one she had dreamed of with Frankie. But despite the warmth she felt when she was with Grant, there was a small part of Sarah that remained cautious. Could someone like him really love her? Could he truly accept her for who she was, with all her past hurts and the baggage that came with raising a child alone? And, more importantly, could she allow herself to trust him fully? It wasn't easy, but as Sarah spent more time with Grant, she found herself slowly opening up. The possibility of love again seemed within reach, and she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. At first, everything seemed perfect with Grant. He was attentive, always there when she needed him, and he seemed to genuinely care about Phoenix. But as the months passed, small cracks started to appear. At first, it was subtle. A comment here or there about how Sarah should raise Phoenix. "He's too spoiled," Grant would say, making offhand remarks that made Sarah feel small. He would question her parenting decisions, suggest that she was too lenient, too protective. Sarah tried to brush it off, thinking he was just trying to help. But the comments started to chip away at her confidence. Then came the impatience. Grant began to get frustrated when Phoenix didn't behave the way he expected him to. The patience he once showed faded, replaced by irritability and short temper. Sarah began to feel like she was walking on eggshells, always afraid that something she did or said would set him off. But it wasn't until the first real argument that Sarah saw the true side of Grant. They were at home, Phoenix was in his room, and they were discussing plans for the weekend. Something so simple turned into an explosive confrontation. Grant's words became sharper, more cutting. He accused Sarah of being too controlling, of not letting him be a part of the family. And then, in the heat of the moment, he raised his voice and his hand. It was the first time Sarah had felt physically threatened by him. She froze, not knowing what to do. The man she had come to trust had just crossed a line. The fear in her chest was undeniable. She had been through this once before with Frankie, and she wasn't about to let it happen again. Phoenix's innocent face flashed in her mind. She couldn't let him witness this. That night, Sarah knew something had to change. She couldn't stay with someone who treated her like this, especially not with Phoenix around. The emotional abuse had already started, and now there was the threat of something more. She had made a promise to herself and to her son that she would protect him, no matter the cost. And the man she thought could offer her stability was now nothing more than a source of danger. Sarah made the decision to leave Grant. As painful as it was, she knew it was the only way forward. It wasn't just for her, it was for Phoenix, too. The man she had allowed into their lives could no longer be a part of their future. She would protect her son, even if it meant walking away from someone who once seemed perfect. After leaving Grant, Sarah found herself alone once again. The emotional weight of her decisions began to settle in. For so long, she had longed for a partner who would love her and help her carry the burden of raising a child, but now there was nothing but emptiness. Phoenix was the light of her life, but the loneliness she felt as a single mother was overwhelming. The nights were the hardest. She would sit in the quiet of their apartment after Phoenix had gone to sleep, staring out the window, her thoughts swirling. How had she ended up here again? She had believed so deeply in the idea of love, that someone would come along and make everything better, that love could heal all wounds. But time and time again, she had been proven wrong. Frankie had betrayed her, Grant had manipulated her, and now she was left with nothing but the echo of her own heartache. At first, Sarah thought she could handle it. She focused on her work, on Phoenix, on creating a safe, stable home. But as the weeks turned into months, the quiet became unbearable. She longed for someone to talk to, someone to share her dreams and fears with. She had friends, of course, but they had their own lives, their own families. It wasn't the same. She needed someone who could understand her on a deeper level, who could make her feel special again, who could remind her that she was more than just a mother. The longing for love crept into every corner of her life. She found herself scrolling through dating apps, swiping left and right, but no one seemed to match what she was looking for. She wanted someone to appreciate her, someone who wouldn't hurt her. But after everything she had been through, Sarah was afraid to open her heart again. The fear of being hurt, of trusting the wrong person, held her back. She couldn't bear the thought of going through another betrayal, another heartbreak. Yet, despite the fear, the loneliness, and the longing, Sarah couldn't completely shut herself off from the idea of love. She wanted to feel whole again, to be touched by someone who cared. The possibility of a future with someone special, someone who could offer her the love and stability she had dreamed of, still lingered in her heart. But how could she find that when every part of her was scared to try? She found herself at a crossroads. Should she stay closed off, protecting herself from the pain of another failed relationship? Or should she take a chance, risking it all for the possibility of love, even though the scars from the past were still fresh? As Phoenix grew older, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in their relationship. What had once been the purest, most innocent bond between mother and child began to shift in ways Sarah wasn't prepared for. It was hard to pinpoint the moment when things started to feel different, when Phoenix's hug lingered just a little too long, or when his words carried a certain intensity that made Sarah's heart race. Phoenix was growing into a young boy, full of energy and curiosity. He had always been her little ray of sunshine, the one thing in her life that made everything feel worthwhile. But now, as he reached his teenage years, his presence began to evoke feelings Sarah hadn't expected. It wasn't just his cute smile or his innocent questions, it was something deeper, more unsettling. There were moments when Phoenix's closeness felt more like a craving than a bond. She caught herself thinking about him in ways she shouldn't. A simple touch on the shoulder would send a shiver down her spine, and when they shared quiet moments together, a part of her couldn't help but yearn for something more, something that she couldn't fully understand. It confused her, made her feel guilty, and she pushed those feelings down, burying them deep inside. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the connection between them seemed to grow stronger. Sarah had always believed that her love for Phoenix was unconditional, a love that was pure and unshakable. But now she was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth: her feelings for him were changing, and it scared her. The guilt and shame of these feelings overwhelmed her. She knew what was happening was wrong. This wasn't how a mother should feel about her son. But there was no escaping it. No matter how much she tried to rationalize it, to tell herself that it was just the natural bond of a mother and child growing stronger, Sarah couldn't shake the discomfort that lingered. She feared that she might be crossing a line, one she couldn't come back from. As the days went on, Sarah found herself increasingly distracted, her thoughts consumed by the shift in her feelings toward Phoenix. She wondered if he felt it too. The moments when their eyes locked a little too long, the unspoken understanding between them, was it something more than just motherly love? Was there something dangerous growing between them? Phoenix, for his part, seemed oblivious to the inner turmoil his mother was going through. He was still just a boy, caught up in his own world, his own struggles with adolescence. But Sarah couldn't help but wonder if he, too, had begun to notice the subtle changes in their relationship. And that, more than anything, terrified her. She had to find a way to stop the growing bond, to bring back the innocence of their mother-son connection, before it became something that would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. It was Sarah's birthday, a quiet, unremarkable day. Or so she tried to convince herself. She had no expectations. There would be no grand celebration, no lavish gifts, just another day spent with Phoenix, who had made her a small card with colorful markers. It was the most she could ask for. But as the evening wore on, something unexpected happened. Phoenix, who had always been a little distant as he grew older, approached her in the living room after dinner. She had just finished washing the dishes, her back turned when she felt the sudden weight of his arms around her. It was a simple, innocent gesture, a birthday hug, but something in the way he held her made Sarah's heart skip a beat. It wasn't just the physical closeness that shook her, it was the warmth that radiated from him, the tenderness that lingered between them. Phoenix's hug wasn't just a son's affection, it felt like something more, like he needed her, like there was a deep longing for her presence. His head rested on her shoulder, and for a long moment she simply stood there, frozen. As she breathed in the scent of his hair, her mind went blank. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to linger in the embrace, feeling his body close to hers. The boundaries that had once seemed so clear between mother and son began to blur in that brief, overwhelming moment. The sensation was intoxicating, and for a heartbeat, Sarah wanted to hold on forever. But guilt crashed down like a wave, pulling her out of the trance. She pulled away quickly, forcing a smile. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, trying to steady her breath. Phoenix smiled, but his eyes lingered on hers a moment too long. Sarah's heart raced, a cold chill running through her body. She had to get a grip. But as the night passed, she couldn't shake the feeling of his arms around her. It was as if everything had changed in that instant. The lines between mother and son, between affection and something deeper, had become irreversibly blurred. Sarah felt herself slipping into a place she couldn't return from, and the fear of where this was leading began to consume her thoughts. The guilt from that night didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Phoenix's embrace, the feeling of his body pressed against hers, his warmth seeping into her skin. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself hyper-aware of their interactions. The smallest touch would send a jolt through her, her heart pounding, her thoughts racing. She tried to ignore it, to convince herself that it was nothing more than a mother's love for her son. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. Then it happened again. A quiet evening at home, just the two of them. Phoenix had come to her room to talk about his schoolwork, his face open and trusting as he sat beside her on the bed. They talked for a while, but this time Sarah noticed something different in the way he looked at her, something almost predatory, though he was unaware of it. It was a subtle change, but it felt like an electric charge had passed between them. Phoenix's hand brushed against hers as he reached for the textbook, and she flinched, her pulse racing. She told herself it was an accident, that he hadn't meant anything by it. But as the evening wore on, they found themselves in increasingly close proximity, their conversations turning into whispers, their silences heavy with unspoken tension. It was the next week when it happened again, this time, more deliberately. Phoenix sought her out late at night, knocking softly on her door. When Sarah opened it, there was something in his eyes that made her stomach turn. Without a word, he stepped inside. He didn't need to say anything. She could feel the weight of his unspoken desires pressing down on her. They sat in silence for a long time, Sarah unsure of what to do, how to react. She wanted to push him away, to tell him this was wrong, but her body didn't obey her. The attraction was undeniable. The more they sat there, the more it felt like their connection was pulling them together, like they were being drawn into something darker, something dangerous. Phoenix leaned in closer, his breath warm against her skin. The moment their lips brushed, Sarah's heart stopped. She knew it was wrong, knew it was a mistake. But it was like a fire had been lit inside her, and she couldn't extinguish it. The boundaries she had carefully maintained for years seemed to vanish in the heat of the moment. She kissed him back, unable to stop herself, lost in the overwhelming desire that had taken root in her heart. But the guilt was immediate and suffocating. As soon as the kiss ended, reality came crashing down. She pulled away, tears welling up in her eyes. This couldn't be happening. This was her son. This was wrong, so wrong. She couldn't stop what had just happened, and that terrified her. The secret they had just shared, something that should have never crossed their minds, was now hanging over them, and Sarah feared what would come next. The guilt was consuming. Every moment spent with Phoenix felt like a battle between desire and shame, love and guilt. Sarah couldn't escape it. Every time their eyes met, every time he got too close, she felt the weight of their secret pressing down on her, suffocating her. But the worst part was the fear. The fear of being discovered. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if anyone had noticed the subtle changes in their relationship. Phoenix's teachers, his friends, her neighbors, were they seeing something she couldn't? Her paranoia grew, and she found herself looking over her shoulder, constantly checking to make sure no one was watching. She had never been a dishonest person, but now she was living a lie. She couldn't even talk to anyone about what was happening. Who could she turn to? Who could possibly understand the dark, twisted feelings she was experiencing? The weight of her secret felt unbearable. Sarah found herself questioning everything. Was she really a good mother? Was she a monster for feeling the way she did? Could she stop what was happening before it spiraled completely out of control? The fear of losing Phoenix, of ruining their relationship forever, gnawed at her every waking moment. She knew she had to put an end to it, but the temptation to continue, to give in to the overwhelming desire she felt, was stronger than she could admit. Her mind raced with possibilities, with consequences. Could she really live with herself if this secret went on any longer? Could Phoenix, Once he grew older, ever forgive her for what they had shared? Would he see her as a monster, or worse, as someone who had failed him? Desperation took hold of her. She knew she couldn't live like this anymore, in a constant state of guilt and paranoia. Something had to give. She had to confront this situation before it destroyed them both. But how could she fix something so broken, so beyond repair? Her story was far from over, and Sarah had no idea where it would take her next. But one thing was certain: she couldn't keep running from the truth forever. Thanks for watching. If you've connected with this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts below. What do you think will happen next? Let's discuss it in the comments.